why you wouldn't last a day in medieval times, and more. Waking up in the Middle Ages. When you open your eyes in the Middle Ages, the first thing you notice is not the sunlight, it is the smell. Centuries before plumbing, disinfectants, or even regular laundry, the medieval world was one of constant odors. You might be lying on a straw mattress, the stalks poking your back, with a thin wool blanket above you. The straw has not been changed for months, so it carries the scent of dampness, mildew, and perhaps even rodents. Fleas are your bedfellows. You shift, scratching at the bites that never quite heal. The sun has risen, but you do not measure time by a clock. Instead, you wake because the village rooster crowed, or perhaps because the church bell in the nearby parish tolled the morning prayers. If you live in a town, you might also hear the sound of traders setting up their stalls, wagons creaking over the cobblestones, and the chatter of neighbors in the narrow streets. The room you wake in is cold. Stone walls absorb the chill of the night. Glass windows are rare luxuries, so your opening to the outside world is a wooden shutter. Drafts creep in freely, and in winter, the frost often forms on the inside of your dwelling. If you are poor, and most were, your house is a single room. The hearth sits at the center, where smoke curls upward through a hole in the roof rather than a chimney. The smoke helps keep insects at bay, but it also clings to your clothes and lungs. For wealthier households, there might be separate chambers, but even lords and ladies did not live in the kind of comfort you expect today. You rise, not in pajamas, but in the same linen shift or tunic you wore to bed. Clothes were expensive, often handed down, patched, and mended until no further stitches could save them. Washing them was not an everyday affair. Linen shirts might be cleaned, but heavy outer garments of wool were brushed, beaten, and only occasionally washed because water and soap were costly. Soap itself was a harsh concoction of animal fat and lye, stinging the skin, often saved for only the dirtiest work. Your first task is not breakfast. It is survival. You may need to tend to animals, chickens, goats, pigs, or cows, before you can think of eating. The animals represent wealth and security, and neglecting them could mean hunger in the coming months. If you are a serf, your lord's land comes before your own needs. Before you tend your small plot, you owe him labor on his fields. Failing to meet your obligations might mean fines, loss of privilege, or worse. Food is never guaranteed. In the Middle Ages, you do not expect variety. Bread is the staple, and whether it is rye, barley, or oat bread depends on what grows in your region. Wheat bread, soft and white, is reserved for the wealthy. Your bread is coarse, heavy, and filled with bits of husk. Sometimes, to stretch the flour, people mixed in peas, beans, or even ground up acorns. Butter or cheese, if you have any, must be rationed carefully. A pot of pottage, vegetables, grains, sometimes flavored with a sliver of salted meat, may be simmering on the fire. This stew is eaten day after day, with new ingredients added as available. It rarely tastes the same, but it never tastes fine. The water you drink is suspect. Wells could be contaminated, streams fouled by waste. Beer or ale, weak and cloudy, is often safer, and children drink it too. In some places, watered-down wine takes its place. Fresh water is a luxury, and people often accepted that stomach ailments were simply part of life. Once you step outside, you face the mud. Medieval streets were rarely paved outside the wealthiest towns. In villages, they are trampled earth, mixed with manure from animals. There are no sewers in most places. Instead, chamber pots are emptied into the lanes. The smells blend: animals, people, waste, food, and you grow used to it. The footwear you own may not be sturdy enough to protect you. A pair of leather shoes might last months if well cared for, but often peasants walked barefoot. Health is fragile. You know that at any moment, illness could arrive without explanation. A fever, a cough, or the swell of a wound might be the beginning of the end. Medical understanding is built on humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Balance is sought through bleeding, purging, or herbs, though often the cure is worse than the disease. You live with the knowledge that many children do not reach adulthood, and many adults die before reaching 40. Yet life goes on, because there is no alternative. Despite this harshness, there is rhythm. The bells of the church mark the hours of prayer and the passing of the day. Markets open and close. Festivals break the monotony with music, feasting, and dance. Even peasants find moments of joy in song, in stories told by the fire, and in small community bonds. Yet these moments are fleeting, as survival demands constant labor. As you take your first steps into the medieval morning, you may wonder, how did people endure such unrelenting discomfort, and what shaped their ability to accept this life as normal? Work, duty, and the weight of daily labor. The morning passes quickly because every hour in medieval life must be filled with purpose. Idleness is not considered virtuous. For peasants and laborers, work begins as soon as the sun rises and often lasts until it sets. There is no concept of the weekend as you know it today. Days of rest are tied instead to the church calendar, which dictates a rhythm of feast days, holy days, and saints' commemorations. Even then, rest is rarely complete. Cattle still need feeding, fields still need tending, and food still needs preparing. If you are a peasant living under the manorial system, your life is governed by obligations. You are bound to the land of your lord, owing him labor in exchange for protection and the right to farm a small plot for your family. This labor takes many forms. On certain days, you work your lord's fields, sowing and harvesting his crops before your own. At other times, you are expected to perform tasks such as repairing fences, digging ditches, or carting wood. The manor court records, dry lists of fines, disputes, and duties, tell us how strictly these obligations were enforced. A failure to appear for work could result in punishment, from extra labor imposed to monetary fines, though money was scarce for most peasants. Beyond farming, daily chores fill the hours. Women in particular manage a host of endless tasks: tending gardens, spinning wool into yarn, weaving cloth, brewing ale, baking bread, salting and smoking meat, and caring for children. Children themselves are not exempt from labor. From an early age, they scare birds from fields, fetch water, gather firewood, and assist with planting or herding. By adolescence, they are nearly as productive as adults, their childhood shortened by necessity. Agricultural life is dictated by the seasons. In spring, fields are plowed and seeds sown. In summer, weeds are pulled and animals grazed. In autumn, harvest dominates every waking hour. Failure to bring in enough grain could mean starvation, not just for one family, but for an entire village. In winter, while outdoor work slows, there is still threshing, milling, mending, and preparation for the year ahead. The hunger months, late winter to early spring, are especially harsh when last year's stores have dwindled but new crops have not yet ripened. It is during these months that survival feels most fragile. Food production is laborious. Grinding grain into flour means hours at the hand mill, unless you are fortunate enough to live near a watermill or windmill. Even then, millers often take a portion as payment, leading to tension with peasants who depend on every ounce of flour. Baking requires carefully managed hearth fires and clay ovens. Salt, vital for preserving meat, must be bought at high cost, transported from far-off coasts or mines. It is not unusual for peasants to eat salted or dried foods that are tough, strong-flavored, and monotonous. If you are a craftsman or townsman rather than a peasant, your work follows a different rhythm. In towns, guilds regulate trades such as blacksmithing, tanning, carpentry, and weaving. Apprentices spend years under the strict authority of a master, performing the most menial tasks before being allowed to craft anything of significance. Townspeople may enjoy slightly more variety in their diet and more contact with trade goods from afar, but their days are no less demanding. The clang of hammers, the scrape of hides being processed, the chatter of markets, and the smell of tanneries are constant reminders of labor's omnipresence. You might think of medieval labor as backbreaking, and it is. Yet there is also an embedded sense of duty and identity within it. To work is to survive, but it is also to belong, to family, to community, to the estate, and to God's order. The church reinforced this through sermons and teachings, reminding peasants that labor was part of humanity's fate since the fall of Adam. It was not simply toil, but a moral duty. Punishments for shirking were real. Lords relied on rents and labor dues, and records show them monitoring peasants carefully. Village communities also watched each other closely. In a society where survival depended on collective effort, an individual who refused to contribute risked the anger of neighbors as much as that of the Lord. There was little choice but to endure. The tools were primitive. Wooden plows that barely scratched the soil, sickles and scythes that required long hours of repetitive motion, and oxen or horses that needed as much care as humans. Injuries were common, and recovery was uncertain. A badly cut hand or a broken bone might never heal properly, turning a productive worker into a permanent burden on the household. While peasants worked the land, lords and nobles managed their estates. Yet even noble life was not without its duties. A medieval lord was responsible for justice in his manor, protection of his people, and service to his king. He might spend hours reviewing accounts, hearing disputes, or planning military obligations. The lady of the manor managed the household, oversaw servants, and ensured the estate's supplies were maintained. Though cushioned by wealth, their lives were structured by responsibility rather than leisure. If there was one constant in medieval daily life, it was repetition. The same tasks, season after season, generation after generation. For the modern observer, the sheer monotony may feel unbearable. Yet for medieval people, repetition was stability, and stability was survival. But what happened when this carefully balanced system was disrupted, when war, famine, or plague struck, overturning the rhythms of daily life and work? Survival, sickness, and the fragility of life. If the medieval day began with discomfort and continued with endless labor, it ended with the awareness of life's fragility. For every plowed field and simmering pot of pottage, there lingered the possibility that tomorrow might not come. Survival was not guaranteed, and the medieval world knew it all too well. Famine was an ever-present threat. A poor harvest could devastate a village, leaving people to stretch dwindling grain supplies with substitutes, ground-up chestnuts, beans, or weeds. In the worst years, like the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, rains destroyed crops across northern Europe. Accounts describe desperate measures, families eating bark, roots, or slaughtering animals vital for future survival. Starvation weakened bodies, opening the door to disease. In such times, death did not strike quietly. It arrived in clusters, whole families, whole villages undone in months. Disease shaped the medieval mindset even more. Everyday ailments such as fevers, infected wounds, or childbirth complications claimed countless lives. The absence of sanitation made infections inevitable. Leprosy, feared for its visible disfigurements, consigned sufferers to leper houses separated from their communities. Smallpox scarred survivors. Dysentery swept through villages. Then there was the Great Terror of the 14th century, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, plague carried off perhaps a third to half of Europe's population. It struck without discrimination from serf to king. People described swellings in the armpits and groin, blackened skin, and death within days. The very fabric of society quivered. Fields went unplowed. Villages stood empty. Survivors struggled to explain the horror. Some blamed sin, others foreign merchants, others the alignment of the stars. The fear lingered for centuries. War also reached into daily life. Even if you never wielded a sword, you were not safe. Armies tramped across farmland, seizing livestock, burning fields, and spreading chaos. Lords demanded men for levies, pulling peasants from their homes to fight. Castles, once thought of as protection, often became targets. And wars dragged on. The 100 Years' War lasted more than a century, punctuated by raids, sieges, and disruptions. For peasants, it meant not glory, but devastation. Punishments for crimes were harsh, reflecting the need for order in fragile communities. Theft of food or animals could result in whipping, mutilation, or death. Even small disputes could escalate into fines or public shaming. Justice was local, carried out in manor courts, town councils, or under the shadow of the gallows. Religion offered a framework for making sense of this precarious life. The church shaped not only spiritual belief but daily routines, prayers, fasts, feast days, and processions. Every bell that rang was both a reminder of time's passing and a call to remember one's place in the divine order. Heaven and hell were not abstract ideas. They were destinations as real to the medieval mind as the next village down the road. To live was to prepare for death, to work hard, to suffer patiently, to obey authority. These were not just survival strategies, but acts of devotion. Yet even within this fragile existence, there was resilience. People found ways to celebrate. Village fairs with music and dancing, seasonal festivals marking harvest and spring, and the warmth of storytelling by firelight. Families passed down tales, not of kings and knights, but of ancestors who endured the same hardships. Community bonds meant survival, and laughter, however brief, provided a balm against despair. To step back and observe, you see a society built on balance, land, labor, and belief woven together. It is a world where every act, hauling water, grinding grain, tending livestock, carried weight. Every life was shaped by vulnerability, yet also by endurance. What seems unbearable to you, fleas in the bed, hunger at the table, relentless toil, was ordinary to them. And in that ordinariness, there was strength. As the medieval day draws to a close, darkness fills the one-room cottage. A fire smolders in the hearth, casting smoke and shadow. You lie back on straw, body aching, but tomorrow will demand the same. The rhythm will repeat, unchanging. And so you cannot help but wonder, was it this relentless sameness that gave medieval people their resilience? Or was it the ever-present reminder of death that taught them how to live?